And that's where you can forfeit your faith. That's where doubt and unbelief and fear and all the other weaponry of the enemy comes in. Because your mind tries to figure out God. And God is not analytical. God doesn't make sense. In fact, if it usually makes sense, you can pretty much mark it's not God. He's illogical.
But my father committed suicide when I was 5 years old. I was sexually and physically abused. Our lifestyle changed drastically. Never heard the gospel till I was 18 years old, living in America, and I had no concept whatsoever that there was a God who loved me, that sent his only son for me, and that I was more than just a body and a mind, that I was a spirit. And someone was sensitive enough to look me in my eyes when I went over to my friend's house, and actually his grandmother's house, and they looked at me and said, "I've got the answers to your problems and the solution to your pain." And I looked at him all guarded and defensive, like, "What are you talking about?" And he opened this book, and it was a Bible, and he began to read to me the words of life and shared with me the plan of salvation. And I felt like I had lived my entire life in black and white, and for the first time it became full color. And I don't know why I'm sharing this with somebody, but I walked outside and the grass was green and the sky was blue, and it was like, it made sense.
God doesn't make sense. In fact, if it usually makes sense, you can pretty much mark it's not God. And you're going to understand. Look at somebody, say, "I think pastor's talking to you." Say, "Excuse me." Call their name out. Say, "Die." To open up, you have to shut up. And it's going to make sense before the end of the message. God doesn't make sense. In fact, if it usually makes sense, you can pretty much mark it's not God. So when you come up under covering of breakthrough, and we're breaking into ground and territory and leading, and as I step foot on here, let me share something with you, and all this will make sense as I get into the Word. God doesn't make sense. In fact, if it usually makes sense, you can pretty much mark it's not God. But I have never done what I'm going to do tonight. Never. We have functioned in it, but I've never explained it to the fullness. I called Pastor Michael yesterday and I said, I'm going completely spiritual and I'm going to show them. And it's the first time I ever have in 20 years, Pastor David. I'm going to show them who they are and what we are assigned to do that will make sense from a spiritual, biblical perspective. God doesn't make sense. In fact, if it usually makes sense, you can pretty much mark it's not God. He's illogical. The God you serve is never logical. It will never make sense. Sensory. Watch, sensory. It will make purpose, but it won't make sense.
What am I telling you? God's ways are not man's ways. God's ways are not man's ways. You can't make a holy God logical or reasonable to a human mind or comprehensive or intellect.
And God's giving him an illogical instruction because God will always speak crazy things to you.
See, God speaks crazy things to you.
And fasting was cleared up so I could hear. When I heard, this is crazy, but the Lord spoke to me. He spoke to Pastor Randy. He said, sow $1,000. I'm not telling anybody to sow $1,000 because God might tell you to sow $12.99. But God told me to sow $1,000. And I thought it was, at the time, the most ridiculous instruction I'd ever had. I mean, I'm being honest. Like, how do you break this with the power of deceit? But I was obedient. Your sheep know how to hear your voice. We don't have to do anything that is not biblical and crazy. We just have to hear. You speak with clarity.
God will always speak crazy things to you.
See, God speaks crazy things to you.
It will never make sense.
You speak with clarity.
God never makes sense.
You know, as you get up right now and send in not only that offering, go to the website, call that toll-free number. You might say, Paula, why are you doing this with the cross? Is that gimmicky? Is that just to get me to move? No, God always gives illogical instructions because the carnal man cannot receive the spiritual blessing of God. There's an elimination between those who would abuse, those who would not understand, because to understand spiritual things, you've got to get out of a logical mindset.
she didn't really know what to do. So she sent for Jesus, which is a pretty logical thing to do. When you have a job that is too big for man, it's a job for Jesus.
Where the word begins to transform into revelation.
Right.
And it's the logic of God. When you're outside of the logic of God, you do illogical stuff.
Absolutely.
And people say, why isn't my life working? Because they're operating in illogic. When you're outside of the logic of God, you do illogical stuff.
Absolutely.
And people say, why isn't my life working? Because they're operating in illogic.
Every time God gave me breakthrough, it was through an illogical instruction. I mean, and it would seem so crazy, and sometimes it would just be so simple.
Yes.
Or God would say, do this or do that, and every single instruction was illogical, never made sense to the natural mind. And every time God would give us an illogical instruction, and supernaturally, he would take the 5 fish and the loaves, and I mean, we saw miracles. All I've lived for the last 20 years is a life of miracles.
Wow.
And that's through illogical instructions.
People say, why isn't my life working? Because they're operating in illogic.